Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
ARROW is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, as always. Well, this is another pre-recorded show, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with the guest that I've got tonight. I'm going to bring him straight in. He is a friend of all of ours on UFO Twitter, but more importantly, he has this huge following on TikTok, over 250,000 followers, over 1 million likes, and I'm going to bring him right in now, Mr. Dan Warren. How's it going, Dan?
Good, Vinny. Thank you for having me on today. It's an honor.
The pleasure is all mine, my friend. And I'm going to jump straight into it because this week coming up, we've got the House Oversight Committee hearing with some great witnesses. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you're going to be attending this, aren't you?
I'm going to be in Washington. That's all that I can guarantee. I have been inundated with people asking me for tips on how to get into the hearing. So I'm afraid the competition is going to be stiff for seats compared to the Senate congressional hearing that was in May. That one was plentiful, ample seating, but this one seems like it's going to be tougher to get in. So I'm making every attempt I can to attend it. I'm going to be documenting the whole process, just like I did last time, so that those people that can't make it to Washington, including the Australian followers I have, the European followers I have, can kind of see what it's like to go to one of these things, since they don't have the opportunity to.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I guess you kind of paved the way, because I think when you did go to that previous hearing and, you know, we saw it all over Twitter and that, I think it just showed people that, like, hang on a minute, I could do that. And it seems that now everybody does want to do that. And so fair play. I mean, I think that's awesome that you did that and really showed what can be done.
I guess I'm a victim of my own success in that perspective then. But yeah, I mean, that was exactly what I was hoping to do, was go to one of these things, figure out how it's done. And it was easy. And so now I'm encouraging other people to do it. I can only do so much by making videos, but if I can get involved in the process itself, I'm part of what could be a very historical moment in time that we all get to experience together. And if I can chip in, I'm willing to.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And this time it's a little bit different. We haven't got kind of the heads of these groups or anything. We've actually got one whistleblower and a couple of, you know, really important witnesses. So I'd just be interested in hearing what you would like to see from each of the witnesses. So I'm going to start off just by saying, like, what would you like to see from Ryan Graves?
For Ryan Graves, and I guess it would be for David Fravor as well, just because he might have some of the information or been exposed to it at some point. But I just want to know more about what happens at the beginning and the end of the gimbal video. I'm sure that they've seen it. They've got to know more about it. They got to know what was on that essay. I'd like for them to describe that in a little bit more detail, because we do know a lot of the bulk of their stories, but it's those unknowns that I'm hoping that they're able to somehow squeeze in under oath to inform us a little bit more about what we aren't able to see. Because I feel like if we get just a few more seconds of the gimbal video, we wouldn't have to worry about the rotation argument constantly over the last several years. So I'm hoping for some of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That rotation thing has just gone on for too long. We do need to kind of step forward from that. So yeah, you're right. I think that's the kind of stuff we need to see. I mean, as far as Fravor goes, do you think there could potentially be more information that he could bring forward, or will it just be sort of giving his story to a new audience?
I think I don't know what else he could possibly talk about, to be honest with you. His best interview is still with Pablo, in my opinion. It's one of his early ones. Who's another pilot, and hearing them discuss it pilot to pilot was highly entertaining. It was like being in a world that you're not able to access as a civilian. The two of them going back and forth, the banter they had, the way that he was able to describe it to him in pilot detail was amazing. I don't know how he could top that interview, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's one that I think has slipped under the radar after a few years now, because that was a really good interview. I completely agree. Now, just before I kind of move on to David Grush, let's talk about, the introduction of Grush, I think over a month ago now. And, there were inklings and rumors of whistleblowers coming forward. And then, you mentioned to me privately a few days ago that his name was leaked. But then he exploded onto the scene. How was that for you?
It was an overwhelming amount of confirmation that made me feel like it's too good to be true, to be honest with you. As soon as he started making the claims, I was like, that lines up. That lines up too. Oh my goodness, it's all lining up with everything that all the rumors and speculation that we've been focusing on for years. And then for somebody to come onto the main stage like that and provide some form of confirmation from an intelligence officer's perspective just made it kind of like come crashing down to like, oh man, this is either true or we're completely being had and they're working us over. But man, it sure seems like it's lining up.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're being had, like you say, I mean, this is an impressive way of doing it. I mean, the guy is putting his not only his reputation on the line, but his freedom potentially as well, with how he's spoken under oath to Congress and stuff like that. I mean, there are still people that say, he has no credibility and that he's not provided anything direct because it's all secondhand and hearsay. But I disagree with that. So what are your thoughts on that?
So what I think this entire situation is exposing is a lack of respect from the Pentagon towards the Congress. I think this is shining a light on that the Pentagon has gotten away from being under the purview of Congress, and they don't want Congress to have oversight over them. And so they're pushing back. And so they're making every attempt they can to maintain power and finances as well, I'm sure. So that's what I'm seeing unfolding right before us when I see this playing out.
Yeah, and I mean, what would you like to see Grush say then this week? Would it just be kind of repeating what he's already said? Do you think there's a certain points that he should really focus on more than others? What do you think?
So the thing that I'm wondering about is if the class of things that he cannot talk about due to classifications change over time. Does the DOPSR process have a revision or a review process where he could possibly talk about Roswell, where he had to stop before? What I would like to know is the question, Representative Luna and Representative Burchett both put out requests for questions from Twitter. And one of the ones that I had for Grush was basically the Air Force has had a reputation for stiff arming the UAP task force, as documented by the Political article from several years ago by Brian Bender. Which organizations within the Pentagon were the most uncooperative to provide you with information that you requested, and who were the most cooperative. And I think that would be a very useful bit of information to have, to be like, okay, where they're not being cooperative for a reason. And the ones that are being cooperative probably are on the same page. And so we can kind of divide who the good guys are and the bad guys are, because I do not consider the Pentagon, the Congress, the government of the United States monolithic. It's a bunch of factions within factions that are causing this divide to happen. So some people are hiding things from other people. And of course, the stovepiping word comes to mind when I start talking about things like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Burchett and Luna there, and they've recently experienced a bit of sort of stonewalling themselves with this trip down to, I think, Eglin Air Force Base, and not being shown what they thought they were being shown. Yet Representative Gates, he did get access to this stuff. I mean, it's okay to say they're not members of a Congressional Defense Committee or anything, but it just seems to be the stops are being put at every block possible for these people not to get the information.
Well, and it was even worse than that, because they talked about how difficult it was to even just get a room to hold this hearing in. So they're saying there's hurdles at every step along the way, which to me, when I hear that, I'm like, welcome aboard, guys. Like, that's what it's been like for 75 plus years. Like, I'm glad that somebody in Congress is starting to experience the reluctance to cooperate that the UFO community has been experiencing every step along the way.
Yeah, you raise a good point there. That's very true. And also, you mentioned there that this question that you had for Grush that on Twitter as well, but also you posed a question to NASA and got a response, which I thought was amazing. So could you just tell us, first of all, your question, the response, and your thoughts on that? Can you break it down?
So the first thing I'll tell you about the response is I held my phone in front of both my kids and my wife's faces as soon as I got a response from NASA. I was like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. But yeah, I basically, they posted on Twitter something unrelated to the UFO topic, but it had Senator Bill Nelson on there. And whenever they post on him on one of their tweets, it makes me go, well, this is an opportunity to either discuss something that he has said in the past or ask a question about his stance on something. So I just threw out the question to NASA this time, asking them why they backed out of the upcoming congressional hearing, as Tim Burchett has stated. And they actually responded to me about a day later and said, well, David Spergel was invited, but he declined the invitation. And I had to go and do some research on David Spergel because I thought he was a NASA employee. Well, I guess he's what would be considered a consultant for NASA that's overseeing the NASA independent study on UAPs, which is, like, in my opinion, splitting hairs, because he is representing NASA, but he's not directly an employee of the NASA. So what NASA said is technically accurate, but it's a disingenuous response, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And you mentioned the independent study group there, and we all know that NASA's never really been particularly seen in a trustworthy light when it comes to the UFO subject. But what are your thoughts on the independent study group? Do you have high hopes for it, or are you more cautious about what they're going to produce, if anything?
What this incarnation of the NASA independent study group is going to produce, in my opinion, is a path forward. They're not going to produce data. They're not going to produce a pie chart with how many different types of shapes of UFOs we see around the world. They're basically doing a scope analysis of what systems do we need to have access to, or construct and build and distribute around the world, to be able to scientifically study this. They're going to go to the extreme ends of figuring out a way to skin the cat, and it's not going to be quick. So I don't expect results from them anytime soon. But the thing that jumps into my mind is things that Kirkpatrick said at the last congressional hearing, where he said, if I find evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, I will work with my NASA counterparts to basically let the world know. So it sounds like the powers that be that represent Arrow are directing everything through NASA. So I would say Aero and NASA are pretty much on the same team, just different uniforms, I guess I'll call it.
Yeah.
But one thing I did like to kind of think about while I was watching the teleconference, which I was grateful for a 4-hour teleconference, that's a lot of information. I mean, it's not all like amazing content the entire time. Some of it's boring. Science is boring. Progress is boring. This matches up with my impression of NASA. But this is also something that I could see happening. We all talk about President Biden coming out on the stage and saying that we're not alone. This is how I would think that would play out. He wouldn't just come on stage. There would be a press conference with all these smart people that pose some information, and then they would bring him out, and he would be able to say, based on the work of these incredibly smart PhDs, I'm here to tell you that we are not alone. So I was kind of envisioning that playing out as I was watching the teleconference.
Yeah, I'd like that. I'd like to see that happen. Absolutely. And you're right. Seeing these things is great because as people into the subject, we can just find little leads that can point us in certain directions, even if it's not big evidence or big amounts of information. But, afterwards in sort of towards the end of June, we saw the Senate Intelligence Bill had approved language for the Intelligence Authorization Act for next year, for 2024, that gives any government contractors, past or current, 60 days to report to AARO any non-Earth origin or exotic UAP material, 180 days to make it available for analysis. I mean, that was huge when I saw that, and I think a lot of people sort of felt the same, but it still makes me think that it gives them time to kind of hide it further or bury it somewhere. I mean, what do you think about that?
It's going to be impossible to trust that we're going to get everything from them, no matter how strictly the language is written. How are they going to find it? I feel like it's just like when I was a kid. I could have some contraband of some kind in my room. My parents were never going to find it, even if I told them I had it. I feel like it's the same thing with the government. They're not going to show us all the cards at any point in the future. So we just have to hope that we can get enough to answer the question, are we alone? That's the big question that we all have, that we all want the answer to. And that's all I'm asking for, is just let us know we're not alone. You don't have to show us how the bread is made, but tell us that there's bread.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, that's something else we can go into following an acknowledgement is, who is it? What do they want? And all those other questions that would follow. Yeah, we just need that one confirmation. But we've seen a lot of other things happening, and we also saw Chuck Schumer's declassification bill to release government records on what they know about UFOs, and he, basing that around this JFK Assassinations Record Collection Act. Again, really big and sounds great at the time, but surely it just leaves them open to be really selective about what they bring forward.
So I actually went through that again today, because that's what my next video is going to be about. So I was trying to digest it at a more analytical level than I had the first time or two that I glanced through it. And I got to say, they do a good job of naming names and closing exit routes. To me, It feels like this amendment, the 64-page amendment, is a vice. And every time they're modifying the legislation going forward, it's just tightening that vice a quarter of a turn each time, to where it's getting tighter and tighter on them, and they're having less opportunities to wiggle out of the way. They do a very good job of eliminating their ability to say, well, we haven't seen proof of extraterrestrial anymore. This type of language updates that they're using, I feel like, are a direct result of the ability for these bureaucrats to weasel out and caveat answers that they give. So to where now it's not, we're not talking about extraterrestrials, we're talking about non-human intelligence. So they're broadening the description so that they can't dance around giving us an answer that isn't technically lying to our faces, but is close enough. That's what I think this new legislation represents, as a tightening of the vice. And it's just a matter of time before something's going to break loose. The dam is bulging right now. There's leaks.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because it does seem that over the past few years, each year we see new legislation brought forward in both the IAA and the NDAA, and it does seem to be honing in on, not giving them, like you say, the opportunity to weasel out of it. So yeah, maybe we'll get somewhere this year, but I'm not always the most optimistic about it, but I can see it going in the right direction.
I'm a perpetual optimist in my real life and in my UFO hobby. So I have that problem, I guess I'd say. But within this language, there is also a $20 million budget associated with the effort. And that is going to focus primarily on the National Archives effort to create a repository for information collected from 25 years past and towards the past, and anything that can be immediately declassified that's UAP related. So there's going to be an enormous amount of data available that possibly wasn't available before for us to consume and digest. Something else that I found interesting about the language in there is they more or less said they said, you guys, if I had to make a breakdown of what I think the beginning portion of this report is, they said, hey, government, Pentagon, we know that you've been weaseling out of giving us the information. You're hiding your answers under the loose description of the Atomic Energy Act, the trans publication. I forgot the other term they used, but they said, hey, not only do we know you're hiding stuff from us, we know the mechanisms that you're using to hide stuff from us. And so we're going to eliminate that as a possibility going forward. So I feel like that's going to help shake some of this stuff loose, is that the parents found where the kid's stash was, and they said, we're going to check this spot every time from now on.
That's a good point, man. And you mentioned being an optimist, and I think that's a good thing, because we certainly have enough pessimists in this subject. So it feels like it's a nice balancing act. So yeah, no, that's really, really good to hear. But after all this, I want to just take this completely back and start in a new direction. I want to know what really first got you interested in the UFO subject.
I've had to answer this question many times, and I wish that I had a more entertaining answer. Of course, I didn't have a sighting. I don't have that moment, but I have had to think about this multiple times, and I keep going back to what was the root cause of my interest in this subject. Obviously, the current phase of my interest in this topic as a content creator is because I want to do my part. I want to be part of something that's historical for mankind. Like I wish I could have been an explorer crossing oceans and getting to see new lands for the first time. That ship has sailed, pun intended. And what's next is we've explored the world. We're going to be a spacefaring nation at some point. Other civilizations would do the same. But where I feel like the original interest in this topic came from was laying in my bed at night as a child, not able to sleep. I was a borderline insomniac, and not being able to shut my mind off at night and just running wild with thoughts. And the thing that scared me and enthralled me was the thought of infinity, the concept of infinity. That there's a limitless amount of time, limitless amount of space. And the more you think about it, the more you go, I'm in my room. There's more to the world than just what's in my head, what's in my room. It's an enormous universe that we live in. So surely there's something out there. There would be another person or entity on another planet somewhere thinking about, I wonder if there's other life out there, just like I'm doing it. There's a song from a movie called Five Goes West. They both look at the same star in different locations, and they're singing a song about it in Disney-ish fashion, of course. But that's the same thing, I think. Like, if I'm staring at a star in space, is there another non-human intelligence out there staring at that same star at the same time? That's what I would say kind of got me hooked on it, because it just starts to open the door to, there's got to be more than what we know as humans. This can't be it. This can't be the peak. There's got to be something else out there. And where is it? And then, hey, what are these things showing up on Earth that people are talking about? And are there someone walking around interacting with us that we don't know about?
Man, that's a really good answer. I wasn't expecting that. That's brilliant. I think that's really, yeah, I love that so much. So what brought you into the community? And I suppose TikTok probably was your first thing, was it? Or were you already kind
Oh
of in the
no.
Twitter sphere?
So I'm going to lay my cards out on the table. This is going to probably get me some hate. I didn't want to be on Twitter. I never wanted to be on social media. I was on Facebook reluctantly. I went to a wedding one time after I had joined Facebook, and it was on my birthday, and somebody at the wedding said, "Hey Dan, happy birthday." And I was like, how in the world did you know it was my birthday? I've never told you. And I went immediately suspicious on them. I didn't want anything to do with public information about myself being out there. But in like 2016, I was watching Secure Team 10. Yes, Secure Team 10. And he got demonetized and was asking people to go onto Twitter to basically plead to YouTube to reinstate his monetization. So I was like, man, I love his videos. They are entertaining. They're the best thing out there right now. And so I created a Twitter account just to complain. And it sat for like about 2 or 3 years probably before I ever went back on there. And the reason that I went back on there, and I've told him this many times, is Keep Plenty, K to the Plenty, that hangs out a lot with Ryan Robbins on Post Disclosure World. His tweets were what drew me into UFO Twitter, because I was like, that guy, I would never be exposed to his thoughts unless it was for being on Twitter. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing that. And so that's where things started ramping up with UFO Twitter, and things really started taking off after that.
That's fascinating, actually. It's quite similar to me in a way. I was reluctant with Twitter, but I got drawn in as well. So how did the TikTok thing come about? Because it's I mean, I don't use it personally, but from conversations I've had, it doesn't seem to be there seems to be a lot of UFO based content, but very little credible content. So how did that come about? How have you found it?
You just hit the nail on the head. Like, that was one goal that I had was, well, the first thing, what got me started on TikTok is because I sucked at making YouTube videos. I tried to do it. It took forever. There was always a glitch. I was just getting so frustrated and mad trying to make YouTube videos that I pretty much gave up. And then I was like, well, let me see what this TikTok thing is. If it's 15 seconds, a minute long videos, maybe I can figure out how to do that. And the user interface, the ability to create videos on TikTok is by far the lowest entry level introduction to video editing and videoing that you can do. So the tools are all in your hand. You don't have to have any additional equipment except the phone, and you can start making videos. And so it's just a trial and error process from there. You can start making a video and improving upon what you do. So that's when I started getting hooked on making these short, concise videos, is because I was able to, without the pain and suffering of trying to sit in front of a computer and figure out YouTube and all that editing software that was external. There was recording equipment, or TikTok has the recording ability and the editing ability built in. So it was just so much easier just to get started. And then things have progressed from there. And I've started to get followers on TikTok. And at the time I started, I feel like it was easier to get followers in large amounts than it is now. Like, there's not as much room for growth. I feel like, just like YouTube, it started out easier and it's gotten a little bit more competitive now. But that was the other, you mentioned something else earlier. I didn't want to make content that was speculative, that was reaching. I wanted to make stuff that was close to what all of us on UFO Twitter were focusing on, which is kind of boring. It's more boring than the grandiose claims that some people can make. And I didn't want to put up any videos of UFOs that are taken and say, like, this might be real. I don't know, because I'm not a video analysis person, so I couldn't tell you what's CGI and what's not. So I was trying to make something that was my original content, my original thoughts, And I tell people that TikTok is my target audience for trying to provide education and information to a large group of people. But when I post my videos on Twitter, I feel like it's a peer review process, because if there's a flaw, if there's a mistake, there's so many people on Twitter that are at my level and a lot of people that are above my level of knowledge on this subject. So they can help me improve my information that I'm presenting by kind of reviewing it. So I have the ability to improve my research on Twitter, but I have the ability to reach outside of the Twitter bubble and reach a broader audience on TikTok.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think, you know, everybody hears that TikTok is this younger generation, and that and I think that's great. These are the kind of people that will be, you know, there in the future with this subject, and so it's good that they're actually getting the opportunity to see credible information. So I tip my hat to you for doing what you do, because it is fantastic, and you really do pull all these stories together in those short segments with the key points, pretty much the facts, because, you know, there's not much else. Like you said, you don't want to be overly speculative. So I think it's wonderful, and yeah, I'm really pleased to see that you've been so successful.
And it's really turned into a very helpful reference material for me. So anytime that I make a video, I'm trying to pack it full of quotes from articles or screenshots of timestamps on podcasts that I listen to or videos that I watch, so that when something comes up again and they're like, hey, do you guys remember when X, Y, or Z happened? I've got a video about that. I can go back and I can see what was important at that time, what was relevant at that time related to that little piece of information. And I can also take like the NASA situation, for instance. I've got probably 7 or 8 videos on NASA that I can play back to back to back to back to back. And then you can see in just a 20-minute period what has been happening with NASA over the past 3 years and how they all tie together. So I find it a very useful reference tool for me as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, just to give you kind of the recollection of stuff, because there is a lot of information out there, and sometimes it just becomes overwhelming. But these short burst videos, I think, would really kind of help, sort of just help with that in general. So yeah, wonderful. But one case that I did want to talk to you about, that I know you've done a video on, and Grush kind of mentioned it, is the 1933 Italy alleged crash. You know, it's a case that I have researched in the past, and it's very difficult to research because we don't have much in the way of documentation. What we do have hasn't had the full analysis I think it maybe could have had. I know that some of the Italian researchers have been holding back from letting other research study the authenticity of them. But, you know, just in general, what are your thoughts on the whole case?
I mean, I find it highly interesting for the sheer fact that, like you said, it's got the Grush connection. I didn't give it a lot of weight. When I made that video, I was like, that's an interesting story. It predates Roswell. That's pretty cool. That's all I thought about it, to be honest with you. And it had Mussolini. So that to me was kind of like a hook as far as interest goes. But when David Grush came out and mentioned it, like I said, it was one of those shots to the system where I was like, oh my goodness, that lines up with what I've been studying. But the thing that David Grush brought to the conversation that I was unaware of is the tie-in to the Catholic Church via Pope Pius XII being I'm going to call him a whistleblower to the United States at the time, to say, hey, these Italians have something that I would prefer you to have. And so the Catholic Church is a really interesting topic all to itself when it comes to this UFO, extraterrestrial life of some nature conversation. They seem to be more up to speed, more accepting of the information, more interested in the information based on what I've seen than any other religious organization out there. But I do find the story highly compelling just for the sheer fact that it was not the US that recovered it. And this is the case that I also throw at people when they're like, well, how come all UFO crashes or UFO sightings only happen in the United States? And I'm like, well, not exactly true. So I like it for the fact that it's not strictly US, that it has the Catholic Church tied into it. It has a super villain of the past from the axis of evil associated with it. And that's another thing that I keep in the back of my mind with this. David Grush mentioned a 8-decade Cold War that's been going on because of UFOs. And I'm wondering if the Cold War isn't between the US and Russia. I'm wondering if it's between the Axis and the Allies. And it's just a reincarnation of that when we look at the Five Eyes, when we look at the Nine Eyes of these other organizations. Are those just rebranded names? Just like we rebrand UFO to UAP, are the Allies the Five Eyes and the Nine Eyes? And is the Axis now just those other guys? Highly interesting for that alone. I've also made I've posed the question: are we dealing with a different? Are we fighting a Cold War geographically speaking, politically speaking, and are we also fighting a Cold War in terms of time? Because the minds that are trying to pry this information out right now are battling the minds from the 40s that established these procedures and policies to prevent us from being able to get to it. So it's the thinkers, the great thinkers, military strategists of the World War II era competing against us right now. Like, we're still trying to fight that battle to get to the information that they wanted to keep us from. So it's just got so many interesting angles to look at when you review the UFO topic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I mean, this case, what baffles me is how Grush was able to mention the case in the first place. And I just hope that we get more from him on that case, maybe this week even. That would be amazing, because it has been it has been around for obviously for so long, and I've dipped into this case over the years and speak to some people about it, and they just say, oh yeah, the Germans acquired the technology and built flying saucers. And then I'm like, oh no, stay away, kind of thing, because that's just going down a path I do not want to go down, because there's just no credibility there for me. So it has been difficult, but if it's legit, I mean, wow, it'd be a pretty special case, and it would make sense with the timeline as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story, and it will also, I'm like you, there's some cases where I'm like, I want those to be relevant, but I shy away from them. The one that I'm thinking of right now is the Admiral Byrd discussions about going to Antarctica and encountering UFOs. I don't know what to do with that one. That one's a tough one to wrap your head around. But it lines up with the 1933 Magenta, Italy UFO, in my opinion, based on pure speculation.
It could indeed, absolutely. I mean, there's something always about Antarctica that is exciting. And, I remember years back when Linda Moulton Howe and her two whistleblowers from all the secret stuff that was going on down there, I found so interesting. But then when you realize that it's not really that, there's not really much to back it up, it's disappointing. And yeah, Antarctica is just one of them strange things that sits to the side for me when it comes to UFOs, but still fascinating.
Well, with Byrd, there is documentation of him going down there and with a armada. And so that's the one thing that I can hang my hat on, is like, that's documented, but I don't know what to do with the claims.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about ancient structures down there as well. And I know that you kind of have looked into ancient history and things like that as part of your interest as well. So can you just talk about, like, I mean, it's something I always struggle with researching, is kind of the ancient connections to the UFO subject, or, the megaliths and things like that. So how do you tackle that area of research?
So I don't really tackle them through the lens of the UFO community. Like, I don't feel like there's, I'm not an ancient aliens guy. I don't feel like the aliens are responsible for everything that humanity has accomplished. But what if, instead of it being ancient aliens, what if it was crypto-terrestrial ancients or something along those lines? What if it's not an extraterrestrial species? What if it's an advanced earthly species that would be responsible for the rumors of Atlantis and things like that? I am a believer that Earth has undergone multiple cataclysms that we can't fathom right now, because we haven't been exposed to them. And like Graham Hancock has said in the past, we're a species with amnesia. If our technologically advanced civilization got hit by even just a solar flare that ejected a mass coronal ejection that short-circuited our electrical system. It's going to be a while before you send an email again. I don't know if it's going to be hard for us to recover from a comet impact that's going to destroy a huge portion of the globe. We would evaporate more or less. And as you watch archaeology expand around the world with additional resources, the thing they keep finding is hidden civilizations that no one knew existed. So there's been a rise and fall of grand civilizations all around the world. And we keep finding older and older ones. No one expected anything to be older than the Middle East. And then we found Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and it was 12,000 years old, reset the clock. Well, they also found indications of a particular timestamp that was important to the makers of Göbekli Tepe. That was 12,800 years ago, which is the Younger Dryas event. And that's basically when sea levels rose 400 feet in a very short amount of time. The climate changed. It would have destroyed a lot of civilizations that were along the coast that we could be potentially uncovering if Noah and we start exploring underwater remnants of civilizations, because that's where people would build civilizations, is next to the water. And if those ancient pre-ice age civilizations were there, they're not accessible anymore. So that's what I look at. Like, are we just another round? Did we get, I mean, humanity's pretty old. We've been taken to our knees. We've almost gone extinct. We barely made it. We're thriving right now, but it's not going to take much to take us back down, and only hunter-gatherers are going to be able to survive what would come next. So I find it interesting from that perspective. And I also think about, well, if there was a branch of humanity, because we weren't alone back then either. There were Neanderthals. We just found out that there's the Homo naledi, that is basically a 3.5, 4 foot tall, maybe 5 foot tall, human-like entity that used tools, had some form of written carvings that they would do, and they could control fire. Where'd they go? We only know about them because of one cave in Africa, but who knows what happened to them and their civilizations? Are we falsely attributing some civilizations, some structures that we have around the world to humanity as modern humans that don't belong to us, but that we inherited? Because even if you go to South America, the Incas out there say that we inherited some of these sites from the gods, from the previous occupants of the land. And so if you go to like Sacsayhuaman, those structures, for instance, Machu Picchu in particular, 3 different styles of stone architecture as you go from the lowest, largest stones to the smallest, most poorly built stones on the top. So it seems like humanity is kind of gone in reverse as far as being able to build things out of stone, that something has been lost. And is it us that are inheriting these sites that are so amazing and we're claiming them as our own? We're building on top of them? Or is it we just can't figure out, like, how can we not figure out how they built these things if we're so advanced, if we keep moving forward? It blows my mind.
It does. And you mentioned Naledi there and the work of Lee Berger, and the recent documentary Cave of Bones, was something that I just watched and found it absolutely fascinating. And that's all it does. It could just take something that would completely rewrite the history books, change everything we know, and it could eventually show us that there is either a lost civilization that was advanced or something along those lines. I really like the crypto-terrestrial theories. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, looking back then and at the UFO subject, do you think there could potentially be multiple origins of what these things are?
I definitely do. And one of the things that I've considered is, let's say, for instance, humanity stays on Earth and we don't find ET. Let's say that we do find something that allows us to jump dimensions. If we do have the ability to, if there is a 4th or 5th dimension, like Grush has mentioned, that can manipulate time, and maybe it creates a portal of some sort. Well, if there's entities that dwell in those dimensions, and we're able to access their abilities through our technology, an extraterrestrial on another planet somewhere else would be able to figure the same thing out about the fourth and fifth dimensions at some point and be able to utilize their technology to replicate the fourth and fifth dimension abilities just like we would. So I feel like if there's someone out there that's as ingenuitive, what's the word I'm looking for? Innovative as humanity, then there's going to be others that are smarter than us. And they're going to be able to take advantage of quantum mechanics in a way that we haven't figured out yet to do things that we can't. And maybe there's entities that, like CIA Director John Brennan said, things that represent something that we may deem like life. Like that's the most vague, open-ended statement about extraterrestrial life I've ever heard. So it sounds like there's something there that we don't understand, that we don't even realize it exists yet.
Yeah, completely. One question that I like to try and ask everyone is just what would your most compelling case be, even if it's your favorite case that you like, spanning, the history of the UFO subject? Is the one that you always go back to, or one that just stands out for you in general?
I have one that stands out for me. Well, I have a class that stands out to me, and it's USOs.
Okay.
Those to me are unidentified submerged objects. Those to me are the most fascinating because it's typically going to be from air to in the water. And that's just an amazing capability. The transmedium travel of these things without compromising on speed or integrity of their ship blows my mind. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, I completely
but
agree.
The case that jumps out to me as far as USOs go is Shag Harbor in Canada. That is a long duration encounter where the military was scrambled, divers were sent down to investigate, foam showed up on the surface of the water in this small town with people that have no ties to the military. It's just a very enthralling case.
It is
rich in information too.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it just seems that it was just that little bit of time ago, 40 odd years ago, that it's just sort of slipped out of the kind of conversation a lot these days. And it always was one of those cases that was amazing because, like you said, it had all those different sort of key points to it. So that's an absolutely brilliant one. Brilliant case indeed. Well, Dan, listen, thank you so much. Go on. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, that's one of those cases that I do want to make a video about, but it's so rich and detailed that it's hard to condense it, just like Roswell. I don't think I'll ever make a Roswell video because it's just too big of a lift. There's too much to go to work with.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean there. Maybe you could do like a part 1, part 2, part 3. I don't know. I think that'd go down quite well.
Maybe make YouTube videos. Give that a shot again. See if it works this time around.
Hey, there's a good idea, man. I like to see that for sure. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I just want to wish you the best for this coming week when you go to Washington. I really hope that you do make it in to the hearing and get to experience, whatever's said and happens. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that you do. And yeah, we'll have to get you back on another time and get an update on what happened. So yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you for having me on, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, man. And to everyone watching, thank you as always for being here. Hit that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll be back soon with a brand new interview. For now, take care. Goodbye.